My dentist job interview gone completely wrong. The interviewer asked me to sit in the dentist chair to demonstrate how I would make a patient feel comfortable. I sat down, the chair reclined, the overhead light came on directly above my face, and I fainted. Not immediately, and not dramatically, just slowly and completely. In front of 3 people who were trying to decide whether to hire me. That is how my interview at a dental clinic ended. Let me walk you back to the beginning, because the chair was not even close to where things started going wrong. I want to be upfront about something before this story makes any sense. I am terrified of dentists. Not mildly uncomfortable, not a bit nervous. Genuinely and specifically terrified in a way that has followed me since I was 8 years old, and a dentist told me I needed a filling and then described the process to me in more detail than any 8-year-old required. I have canceled 2 dental appointments in the last 12 months. I once drove to a clinic, sat in the parking lot for 15 minutes, and then drove home without going inside. So why, you are reasonably asking, did I apply for a job at a dental clinic? The honest answer is that the job was an administrative reception position, which means I would have been booking appointments, managing records, and answering phones. 0 patient contact. 0 clinical involvement. I would be the person on the other side of the phone telling you the dentist would see you now, not the person holding anything near your face. This seemed, at the point of application, like a completely manageable situation for someone with my specific fear. I was about to discover that I had significantly overestimated my own manageability. Tell me in the comments. If you had a genuine phobia of something, and a job opened up in that exact environment but in a completely administrative role that should have had nothing to do with the thing you were afraid of, would you have applied anyway, or would you have had enough self-awareness to know the context alone would be a problem? Because I did not have that self-awareness. And I am telling you this story as a direct result. The interview was on a Wednesday morning at 9:30. I arrived at 9:15, which felt professional, and spent the 15 minutes in the waiting room doing something I had not fully anticipated, which was sitting in a dental waiting room as a fully conscious adult with nothing to read and nowhere to look except the dental posters on the wall explaining the stages of gum disease in diagram form. There is a specific poster that dental clinics all seem to have. The one with the cross-section of a tooth showing the nerve, that I have seen before in passing and never thought much about. When you are sitting alone in a quiet room with nothing else to look at, that poster takes on a completely different character. There was also a small plastic model of a jaw on the reception desk, with a toothbrush next to it for demonstration purposes, and a faint background sound of drilling coming from somewhere behind the walls that I was choosing to interpret as a building maintenance issue, and not what it obviously was. By the time the receptionist called my name, I had been sitting with the tooth nerve cross-section and the muffled drilling for 9 minutes, and was already not in the best mental state for a professional conversation. I straightened my jacket, picked up my folder, reminded myself I was applying for a phone and scheduling role, and walked to the interview room. The interview room was a small office off the main corridor. The interviewer was the clinic manager, a woman named Patricia, who was warm, efficient, and entirely professional. She was joined by one of the senior dentists, Dr. Mita, who was also warm and professional, and who was wearing scrubs, which my brain registered as a threat despite the fact that Dr. Mita was sitting across a table from me, holding a notepad, and was doing absolutely nothing threatening. The first 10 minutes went well. Patricia asked about my administrative experience, my background in customer-facing roles, my availability, and my comfort with scheduling software. I answered everything correctly because I had actually prepared for this interview, and these were questions I knew the answers to. I was doing fine. I was professional. I was recovering from the tooth cross-section poster. And then Patricia said something that I had. She said the clinic liked to give all reception candidates a brief orientation of the practice space, so that successful applicants felt comfortable with the environment from day one. She said this would only take about 5 minutes, and then we would wrap up the interview. She said it in a completely normal tone, because for a normal person with no specific phobia of this environment, a 5-minute tour of a dental clinic is a completely normal thing. I said that sounded great. I said it with a confident expression. Inside, I was recalibrating everything. This is where I need you to comment, because I have thought about this decision many times since. If you were in an interview going well, and the interviewer offered an optional orientation tour of a space that you were deeply uncomfortable with, would you have said yes to keep the professional momentum? Or would you have politely skipped it and explained your concern? Because I said yes, which felt like the confident choice, and I want to know if anyone would have made the same call. The tour was fine for the first 2 minutes. Patricia showed me the reception desk, the filing systems, the scheduling screens, the break room, normal office spaces that happened to be inside a dental clinic. I was managing. I was nodding and asking sensible questions about the software system. Dr. Mehta had gone back to his work, and it was just Patricia and me walking through the practice, which felt much better. Then we walked into the treatment room. I want you to understand what a dental treatment room smells like, if you have not been inside one recently, because the smell arrived before anything visual did. That specific clean chemical smell that every dental clinic has. The one that is completely neutral and inoffensive in any other context, but that the phobia part of your brain has indexed under "this is where the bad things happen." Patricia was talking, continuing the tour, explaining where records were stored and how the equipment log worked. I was nodding and tracking about 60% of what she was saying, which was the 60% that did not involve looking directly at the overhead light or the instrument tray. The tour was fine for the first 2 minutes. Patricia showed me the reception desk, the filing systems, the scheduling screens, the break room, normal office spaces that happened to be inside a dental clinic. I was managing. I was nodding and asking sensible questions about the software system. Dr. Mehta had gone back to his work, and it was just Patricia and me walking through the practice, which felt much better. Then we walked into the treatment room. I want you to understand what a dental treatment room smells like, if you have not been inside one recently, because the smell arrived before anything visual did. That specific clean chemical smell that every dental clinic has. The one that is completely neutral and inoffensive in any other context, but that the phobia part of your brain has indexed under "this is where the bad things happen." Patricia was talking, continuing the tour, explaining where records were stored and how the equipment log worked. I was nodding and tracking about 60% of what she was saying, which was the 60% that did not involve looking directly at the overhead light or the instrument tray. Patricia walked me through it professionally and quickly. The chair, the overhead light, the instrument tray, the suction unit, the storage. She was covering it in the tone of someone who walks through this room multiple times a day and finds it completely unremarkable. Which for her it was. For me, it was the specific environment my brain had been trained to associate with specific kinds of discomfort since I was 8 years old, and my brain was now processing it in real time at a level of detail I had no control over. I told myself firmly that I was an adult, and that nothing in this room was going to be used on me, and that I was here to talk about scheduling software. This helped somewhat, but not as much as I needed it to. Here is where the interview took a turn I genuinely did not see coming. Patricia said that one of the things the clinic found helpful was for reception staff to be able to speak knowledgeably to anxious patients about what the experience was like, to help ease their nerves over the phone or at the desk. She said it was entirely optional. But if I was comfortable, they sometimes asked candidates to sit in the chair briefly, just so they had a genuine first-hand reference point. She gestured to the chair. She was completely casual about it. I lasted about 40 seconds. I know it was 40 seconds because I counted later, trying to reconstruct the timeline. For the first 20 seconds, I was maintaining something resembling composure, answering a question Patricia was asking about my experience with nervous patients, which is genuinely one of the more ironic questions I have ever been asked. Somewhere in the next 20 seconds, my vision started narrowing in a way I recognized but could not stop. And then the room tilted sideways and I came back to consciousness with Patricia's assistant holding a cold cloth to the back of my neck and Dr. Mehta standing in the doorway with an expression that suggested this was not something that had happened at a candidate interview before. I was in the chair for another 10 minutes while they made sure I was all right, which meant I spent more time in a reclined dental treatment chair during this job interview than I have voluntarily spent in one in the last 4 years combined. At some point during this recovery period, a dental nurse whose name I never caught came in, assessed the situation, and left again with the expression of someone who had seen stranger things but was choosing not to say so. I drank a full glass of water. I said I was fine approximately 6 times. Patricia told me there was no rush. Dr. Mehta checked my pulse with 2 fingers on my wrist in what I suspect was more professional reflex than clinical concern, and told me my heart rate was perfectly normal, which I appreciated and which I also did not fully believe. Patricia was extraordinarily kind about it through all of this. She was entirely professional and calm, and did not make me feel any worse than the situation already guaranteed I would feel. Dr. Mehta said, and I want to be very clear this was said with genuine warmth and not unkindly, that in all his years of practice he had never had someone faint during a candidate interview for reception work, and that he meant it as a compliment to the thoroughness of the process. I did not get the job. I found out by email 4 days later, and the email was the kindest rejection I have ever received. Which tells you everything about how much they felt they had to compensate for. Here is the insight I took from this, that I genuinely did not have going in. The problem was not that I fainted. The problem was not that I was afraid of dentists, which is an extremely normal fear shared by a significant portion of adults worldwide. The problem was that I had located the fear in the clinical procedures, in the tools, in what actually happens in the chair, and had completely missed that the environment itself, the light, the chair angle, the room, was enough to produce the same response without any of those things being present. I had thought I was afraid of the dentist. I was actually afraid of the context, and no administrative role exists in a vacuum that is entirely separate from its context, which is something I should have worked out before the interview, and definitely worked out during it. I booked a dentist appointment the following month, went, and sat in the chair without fainting, which I am counting as personal growth. So here is what I genuinely want to know from you, because I think about this interview a lot more than is probably healthy. If you had walked into a job interview, performed well for the first 15 minutes, and then fainted in a demonstration chair in front of the hiring panel before being revived with a cold cloth and water, would you have sent a follow-up email the next morning like I did, trying to reframe the incident as evidence of thorough engagement with the role, or would you have considered the email unnecessary given the clarity of the situation? Because I sent the email, Patricia replied. She was very kind. I did not get the job. Tell me what you would have done in the comments, because I need to know whether the email made it better or worse. If you love stories like this, the kind where you walk into something with full confidence and walk out horizontal, subscribe, because this channel is entirely built on those moments, and there are many more of them coming.